I can remember saying to myself as I was driving along, this makes me want to cry, was I matter too. I was just like, I matter too, I matter too, I matter too, I matter too. And it was because I was having to convince myself that my voice did actually matter in a world where I felt like I wasn't being heard, in a world where I felt like I was being silenced.
Welcome to Voices on the Edge of Change, episode 8. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Natasha Wallace, a leading leadership expert in wellbeing and keynote speaker, as well as an author. She's worked with hundreds of leaders and leadership teams, whether that's at JPMorgan, Ministry of Defence, or Xero, just being some of the names amongst her clients. Her work has directly contributed to improve both bottom line results and supported the most successful exits of 2 scaling companies. She's an author of the best-selling book, The Conscious Effect, 50 Lessons for the Better Organizations for Wellbeing, and Peace is a Choice. Her latest book is out next year. I'm delighted that she's chosen to come and talk to me first. She has won multiple awards as a visionary CEO in the leadership development space. And having worked in the leadership development space for a very long time, I am very excited to talk to Natasha today. I think what distinguishes Natasha is really her rare ability to hold science, strategy, and humanity actually in the same space. Natasha is a recognized and prominent authority in this space, in her field, and a trusted advisor to, quite frankly, many CEOs and leadership teams who are successfully driven and committed to excellence. She works with leaders who are navigating increasingly complex markets in these very time-poor, overstretched situations. Her approach enables leaders to stay clearly focused, very clear-headed under pressure. She builds resilience, high trust, and high trusted cultures that lead self-awareness, empathy, and confidence, along with conscious leadership. So I've got quite a few questions that I'm really looking forward to asking her. So I'm so delighted that Natasha's chosen to join me this morning, particularly as we've now entered into 2026. A lot of us will be thinking about, what does that mean? What does that look like? How did we feel when we left 2025? I certainly left 2025 anxious. Some very exciting things going on, but at the same time can feel overwhelming. So Natasha, welcome. Thank you so much for agreeing to be here today with me. I'm delighted to have you. And you're looking gorgeous in that lovely stuff. I wore red. I nearly wore red. Welcome to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, very grateful to be invited on.
No, we've actually met each other, I think, a couple of years ago. We've been knocking about behind the scenes, finding out more and more about each other. And I think a couple of synergies before we get into the main questions. You know, we both come from a deeply seated leadership background, education and leadership. So I know we had quite a lot in common in that respect. And I've done a wonderful intro to you, which my listeners would have now heard. But I know that a lot of people, we're only a few months into 2026. A lot of people, I think, felt, well, I think it's mixed as ever in any year, isn't it? Right? Some people come out of one year going, that was like the best year. And then others come out going, God, thank God that's gone. And let's hope this one's going to be better. And we all obviously go into a new year wanting every year to be better than the next. And they seem to be faster and faster. I know, because I know you a little bit. I don't profess to know you well, but I know you a little bit. And I know that you have a bit of a backstory, which you might share with us today. But tell me a bit about, you're here because you're doing a lot in the leadership field. You're particularly doing a lot around conscious leadership. And I think that for me, certainly coming up to Christmas last year, one of the things that I was very clear about was doing a lot around compassion. You probably saw the homeless campaign I did. I did a podcast with Nigel Kirkpatrick about compassion and why we need more compassion in the world. So I think your podcast is really good about that follow-up into not just compassion and empathy, but how do we really sit with being a conscious leader? Because I think that's quite hard. And particularly when we are driving our teams quite hard, the world is really complex, things are speeding up. Tell me a little bit about how you came to conscious leadership and what was your story to get you there?
Well, so the first thing I want to say is that the story I'm going to tell today is not the story I normally tell. And it was actually inspired by listening to you and Nigel on the podcast about compassion. Yeah, it's interesting actually, because I was listening to Nigel talking about how he'd moved from being a toxic leader to a compassionate leader. And now he's doing lots of work around compassionate leadership. And I just thought he was so open and so honest. And I don't tell my story in its fullest form normally for a few reasons. One, because I never wanted to villainize my employer. When I left leadership or paid employment sort of over 8 years ago, I made a decision that I wasn't going to go out into the world and tear them apart. I didn't think that was the right thing to do. So I made any of my storytelling, I guess, and it's real and authentic, but I focused it on my burnout, what I needed to learn about myself, and hence the consciousness, hence conscious leadership. I didn't really talk a huge amount about the environment I was working in and how tough that was, but I think I'm ready to. It was that conversation between you and Nigel who inspired me to be a bit more honest about it. But also, I'm writing a book at the moment called Peace is a Choice, where I am going to be actually very, very honest about what really happens. And that'll be out this year. So, people will be more about. Well, yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think it's really important actually to say that this isn't about telling my story because I want people to hear me. I mean, I do. It's not about me, actually. I mean, the whole point of this, and this speaks to the conscious leadership piece, is it's about authentic, honest, true storytelling, sharing real lived experiences so that other people can navigate the world with greater ease and understanding. And I think that it's a really important, we were talking about it before we started recording, it's a really important aspect of being human, is being vulnerable and sharing our stories, sharing the truth about what's actually happened to us, so that when people are experiencing difficulties, and of course that's just normal everyday life, they don't feel alone.
Yeah, and I think that's such a valid point, actually, when you say they don't feel alone, because the reality is we sit in a much more lonely environment. If I think that, since COVID, we've turned our utility room into an office and whatever else it needs to be on that day. But we are in a much more enclosed environment. We're not having as many water cooler moments or even standing at the coffee shop or lunch queues. I woke up to a post this morning from somebody I really, truly respect who said that they woke up and the first WhatsApp they opened was from somebody asking for help. And they actually work for charity, but nevertheless, the fact that that's the first message that they wake up to at 8 o'clock in the morning, I think, we are much more lonely and we're not involved with people. And it's an effort to go out now. I mean, I dare I say it, because I love people. I mean, my husband will tell you, I crave, I'm a flower, water me, water me. I need people, otherwise I won't survive. So I think what you're saying is so, so important. Tell me more. Tell me what what you're thinking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't really know what's going to come out now today because I've told a sort of filtered version of my story for so long. Who knows what's going to come out? But what brought me to conscious leadership? So I was thinking this morning about the experience that I went through. It made me really emotional. So I also said to you before the podcast, like, I can't guarantee that I'm not going to cry when I tell this story, because now that I'm telling the real story, it brings back all of these old emotions. But the lasting feeling that I have from the experience of leaving my employer was is one of like devastation and pain. And I still carry trauma from that experience. And it's interesting because I've experienced lots of trauma in my life. And of course, it's not a surprise that somebody who's working in conscious leadership and becoming more conscious and understanding self has probably experienced some tragedy or trauma or adversity in their life.
Yeah.
Of course, I mean, it's like, turning the pain into purpose. That's the journey that I ended up going on. But I've got to admit that of all of the traumatic experiences that I've had in my life, this one is by far the most traumatic. And it comes back to the point about people. We need people. So what happened was, as the HR director of a consulting firm, I took my job really, really seriously. I mean, some would say too seriously. But the strapline for our people strategy was creating the best place to work. And that really matters to me. I mean, that really did. It wasn't, as far as I was concerned, it wasn't just a strapline. It was a sentiment that I lived and breathed by every day. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want to sound evangelical. That didn't make me the perfect leader. And it didn't mean that I had all the answers to how we did it. But it did mean that it was a very, very important mission. And I felt that myself and my fellow leaders should be upholding it. So, I mean, I guess that's the backdrop.
Well, that's a value, isn't it? I mean, that recognize it's a vision and a mission, but that's essential. I mean, I've worked in 3 culture change programs myself, right? And creating the best place to work or whatever, shaping our future, whatever the strap line is. The fact is, you get up every morning saying, I will make this the best place to come into, the most exciting place, the most creative. I mean, I built West One with a whole bunch of people, and that was it. This was the most creative building you've ever worked in. Like, yeah, you had to get out of bed for. So I think that whether you ever reach utopia, you have a vision and a mission. And if you don't have that, and if you don't believe it, then how can you create it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really fair point. And actually, a lot of the work that I now do with leaders, we're talking about their values. Because actually, when you can uphold your values in the workplace, when your workplace is congruent with your values, you feel good, we're better, or okay. When your workplace or the environment that you're operating in is incongruent with your values, you don't feel good. So, that was something I absolutely learned. And I learned that my eventual burnout, in large part, was actually a consequence of the environment that I was working in and the behavior that I saw around me cutting across my value system every day for years. So that's actually what ended up sort of eroding the way that I felt. But just going back to the point about creating the best place to work, I mean, I worked really closely with the marketing team. In fact, I led comms for years. So I was the marketing team, although that was always a joke because that was not my skill set. HR was my skill set and employee engagement and internal comms. And I happened to pick up marketing too. But the partner who had sort of oversight of marketing, I can remember sitting in a room one day with him, and it was the morning that I'd come up with this idea for the strap line.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think on that day, this was such a big deal for me. I said to him, right, I've had an idea for the strap line of the people strategy. And I said, it's creating the best place to work. And he was like, that's amazing. I was like, I know, it's amazing, isn't it? I'm so excited about it. Like now, creating the best place to work seems like such a sort of innocuous group of words. But at the time, it really meant something to me. Then it really resonated with him. And I was like, this is amazing. We're going to do this. So, I mean, that was the energy that was sitting behind that strapline. It was just so important.
Yeah, we've all been there, we're going to create a one BBC, we're going to share our talent across the airways, which actually, to be fair, they did. But, you make these things up in a room and you get all excited. And then the reality hits, you walk out the room and you think, well, actually, I remember Richard Sembrook, who I adore. If he's ever listening to one of my podcasts, he was the director of news and went on to be the director of global news. I really value this gentleman in my life. He probably knows. But, he just said, Lou, I've just got, you just need to come and do one thing for me for 2 years. And I went, like, what's that? He said, just make us fall in love with ourselves.
Wow, that's such a cool thing to be like. What a great mandate.
What a great mandate. But I sort of sat in a room with a whiteboard going,
what does that mean? Well, exactly.
And I quite a niggle just literally they've got to go and fall in love with themselves.
Yeah, no, that is hard. That is really hard. That is really hard. You've got to be a creative to even try and solve that problem. Yeah, but great mandate. But yeah, so I mean, that was the energy that I got out of bed with every morning. And in the end, what led to my burnout was basically the inability to uphold the promise that I felt that I had made to the organization. And of course, I mean, there was many, many, many steps to the burnout and me ending up collapsing under it all in the end. But I can remember having a conversation with one of the senior leaders at one point and saying to them, I can't be the spokesperson for a people strategy. I feel this is really deep. hard for me to talk about, but I can't be the spokesperson for a people strategy that only I believe in. And I ended up feeling like it really mattered to me that our people felt good about coming to work and we're being treated well. And I ended up feeling like a bit of a lone voice and carrying that, what ended up being quite a heavy burden actually, on my own. And this is why I never really wanted to talk about this as openly as I am now, because I don't want any of the leaders that were there in the organization at the time to think, well, hold on, like, what's she saying about me? You know, I'm a good person, or I'm a nice person, or I was doing my best. Because I'm almost certain that my fellow leaders, many of them were nice people and they were doing their best. But there was a climate and there was a culture that meant that we could not really do our best. And that was coming from the very top. And it wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough as far as I was concerned. I, at the time, remember, I didn't feel self-righteous. I would say I'm part of the problem. You know, we're the sort of privileged leaders. We get to decide when we come into work. We get to decide the shape of our role. We get to decide how we work. We get to decide the clients we want to take on. But actually, everybody else is just
Follow, I suppose.
expected to follow us. And actually, we need to do better by them. And we're all in this together. We all need to do better. We all need to behave better as leaders. And I can remember the very last day I was in work, I stormed out of a meeting, which is very unlike me. I mean, I generally was quite calm and considered and gathered. I sort of prided myself on my professionalism. But I was in a meeting with a couple of our leaders where we were talking about, this is so innocuous. We were talking about project management. And they were saying our people just need to manage projects better. And I was saying, I just don't think it's our people. I think it's the fact we're not leading our projects well. As leaders, we're not giving enough briefs. We're not keeping people connected enough to the client. We're not bringing people in early enough on projects so that they understand the scope, so they understand the deliverables. We're moving people in and off projects too much, which means we're not getting flow and continuity.
Yeah.
And we are, there was this skit that a group of younger leaders had done as part of a leadership development program that we ran every year, where they use these Lego characters to animate what getting a brief from a senior leader in the organization at the start of a project felt like.
Right.
And basically you had a male part, this sounds quite crude now, but a male partner goes into the toilets at work with the project lead, the engineer they're putting on their project. And they're both stood at the urinals, and the partner, the senior leader, turns around to the engineer and says, "We've had a new project in from X. It needs to start next week. It's a similar project to, that one we ran like 3 years ago in that sector. I want you to lead it." Engineer is like, "Oh, fantastic. Great. That sounds fun. Brilliant. Okay, great. Well, so I'll see you later then." The engineer's like, "But what's the scope of the project? Like what does the client want us to deliver?" And the partner's like, just read just read the reports and the documents from the project we did 3 years ago, and you'll get a general feel for it. And the reason for that animation was the engineers were saying, like, how are we supposed to deliver an amazing project and deliver excellence and, please the client when we don't really know what we're supposed to be doing? And so I was in the middle of these two groups of people, with the partners saying that the engineers just need to be better. And I was like, no, like, we need to be better. The leaders need to be better.
If they don't understand the brief, I mean, I had a terrible moment with, I won't name him. I was actually getting into a lift, and he just, as the doors closed, he sort of dropped a clanger of something that needed to be sorted out in the next 24 hours. And if it wasn't, like, we could go off air. And he went, "So you've got that, right?" And then the doors just, and I came out the lift on the other end thinking, what did it, I mean, he spoke really softly. He had a really soft voice for a very big man. And I was like, whoa, what's that? What was it? And I've said this story one more time. Somebody come work for me one time. Unfortunately, a gentleman who'd only ever been on a particular grade in the organization, very militant, union worker. And of course, being a union member, as you'll imagine, as an HR director. That's not generally a good thing if you don't understand, because guess what?
No.
The next move is off to the union conversation. Anyway, that long story short, he's worked for me for about 6 months. He's understanding the culture change program. He's understanding the pressures that we're under and the reasons for the savings. And one day I come back to my desk at lunchtime and he's crying. I mean, he's a big man, a really big man. And I just assumed somebody had died. You know, what do you think at that point when you see a grown man crying at his desk? And we obviously asked those questions, and then he went, "No, no, no. It's just that for the first time in my life, I actually understand why we need to save all these millions, and I feel really sick that I have stood in the way for 4 years, trying to go on strike, and I feel deeply hurt that I have hurt the organisation that I love." Because I genuinely had nobody like you or anybody else in this team, because I'm not putting it all on me, but we did work very closely together. And he said, I feel sick that I have stood in the way of progress for 4 years. And I think, to your point, that sense of whether it's building a great place to work, whatever the strapline is, whatever the change outcome is, whatever, how do you, and I say this a lot in my keynotes as well, how do you really get people to hear what you're trying to say, what you're trying to achieve? How do you get people to see the vision, touch it, feel it? We're living in a world now, thankfully, you can show it, actually. You could now make an animated film in 3 minutes that tells people what it is you want to do. But way back 8 years ago, and same for me, you had to sort of try and conjure it up in your brain, didn't you?
Yeah.
But everybody saw the same roses and the same sunflowers or whatever else it might be.
Yeah.
So I understand deeply how you feel. I think most of our, just thinking about our listeners, I'm sure there's somebody on this podcast listening to it now that will think, oh my God, do you know how many meetings I sat in? And we all joke about W1A, but those moments where you come up with that strat line, you come out the room, you're hugely excited, you go out. So let's pick up your story. You've now recognized that you're possibly managing this alone. You don't feel that, certainly senior leaders are supporting your mission or your vision. They're not living the values of what you believe a great place to work looks like. What happens next, Nasha? What changes for you at that time?
Well, so that was so the day I walked out of that room, one of the senior leaders ran after me and was like, "Oh God, what's the matter? What's the matter?" I mean, I can imagine he was thinking, "Oh, this is a bloody nightmare. You know, this woman's now crying. Like, how the hell do I deal with this?" And I ended up just saying to him, "Our people aren't happy and it's not good enough. Like, God, I don't know why I feel so emotional about this today. It's not good enough. We've got to do something about it. It's on us. We are the leaders." And I won't swear, but he basically said, nobody's effing happy in our industry. We just have to put up with it. And that was the day I left. I was like, no, like that's not okay. It's not okay to just say that nobody's happy in the industry. Like, what? I mean, at the time, that seemed so ridiculous to me that he was so willing to put up with the status quo. And of course, there is a little bit of elitism here because he was fine. Like, he was making tons of money. He was a partner. We were doing really well. Like, we were making lots of money. And of course, I think in that sort of environment, when you are, that's even harder because, you know, there's profit share. The partners are fine. They're
Well, Nigel's story. I mean, Nigel basically walked away from a £10 million payout.
right. Yeah.
Because he collapsed, because his feeling was, I will be dead if I stay. Like, he was in such a state from his toxicity. I know it's a different kind of thing. He was
Yeah.
eager, but his toxicity, he would say, and if you haven't listened to his podcast, by the way, please do listen to Nigel Kirkpatrick's podcast. But he would absolutely say that it was killing him, and he actually believed he would be dead if he stayed. So those feelings that you're talking about, and bringing it back to you, when you're in the depths of despair, which clearly you were at this point, because you had this amazing view, you had this wonderful outlook. And when we get into, because I'd like to go a bit deeper into the conscious bit, you were very conscious of what you were trying to achieve, what you wanted to do, how you wanted it to look and feel. But actually, nobody else was having that conscious moment, were they? It wasn't, or if they were, it wasn't in the same way, I suppose. I mean, maybe we need to unpack that a bit.
I don't even know. I mean, at the time, it felt like they weren't. And actually, what ended up happening, this is something I've never ever mentioned, I've never spoken about. What actually happened was I took some time off. I got signed off sick. I just couldn't. I mean, at this point, I know that was my last day in the office. I didn't know it was going to be my last day in the office. I just knew I couldn't be there at that current time. So I got signed off sick. And then I ended up thinking, I just don't know if I can go back. Now, this was one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make in my life because I loved it there. Like, there will be people who understand this, but for anybody who's grown up in a family environment that was toxic or who has never really found a sense of belonging within their own family, when you find it at work, it means so much more to you. And I had found it at work. I never had it when I was growing up. I came from quite a sort of difficult family environment. And actually, this job, which I stayed in for 10 years, gave me a sense of family. It gave me a sense of belonging. This is why what ended up happening became so painful. I recognized that. Like, I recognized that it was
It's like a divorce. It's a breakup, isn't it?
It's like everybody in my family sort of turning against me because what ended up happening was they didn't want me to leave. So they were sort of trying to, I almost think of it as like they were sort of patting me on the head going, there, it's okay. It's not as bad as you think it's going to be. Look, come on, come back to the office. Everything will be okay. Come back and do your job. We don't want to lose you. That was the conversation from their end. And I was like feeling, as if there's been this sort of total inequity going on and this lack of justice where I'm like, no, look, you have to listen to what I'm saying. Look, we have to change. And don't get me wrong, I feel like I was constructive. I don't think I was just being an arse. I wasn't just causing trouble. I was coming up with the way that we could fix it. I was trying to be solution focused and saying these are some of the things that I think we need to work on in order to improve things. And some of it was just about giving better briefs on projects. I mean, this wasn't like we all need, we need to sort of turn to God or something. I mean, I was just talking about how we run the business better, which I thought would make us more profitable as well. I mean, I would say, like, we're making all this money. We could make so much more money. I still saw it through a commercial lens. And so what ended up happening was I got signed off sick. I then ended up coming back and having a meeting with the two most senior leaders in the business. I'll never forget how horrific driving to that meeting was that day. I had about an hour's drive, and all I can remember saying to myself as I was driving along, this makes me want to cry, was I matter too. I was just like, I matter too, I matter too, I matter too, I matter too. And it was because I was having to convince myself that my voice did actually matter in a world where I felt like I wasn't being heard, in a world where I felt like I was being silenced.
And I think, oh, sorry, I'm so sorry.
No, you go.
No, I was going to say, I think something that's coming into my head as you say this, because I think a lot of people don't realize, but being at the top, clearly top of your game, HR director, major organization, is so lonely. And the fact that you're saying those affirmations, I matter too, I am important, I have a place at this table. And I don't know, I don't really want to go down this tack because I don't want to think it's stereotype, but I do wonder sometimes more as a woman, whether it's harder on us because it is harder to break the glass ceiling. And I really don't want to go down that road in a conversation, but I wonder if there's more on our shoulders because of that, because we almost have to prove ourselves twice as hard as any of our male counterparts. So that bit about, I really matter, my voice really matters.
Yeah.
So, again, I won't name her because it's not fair, but I worked with, in my lifetime, so that nobody can work out where, because I've worked in other organisations apart from the BBC. I worked with somebody who was incredibly senior, and she was in a part of life that there was only one of her in the whole organisation because she was very, very skilled in something very, very particular that was very, very needed. And I don't want to, because if I say what it is, everyone will know who it is.
Yeah.
And yet she would say to me, far more qualified than any of the executives at the table because of her field. And yet she said nobody ever heard like her.
Yeah.
Even the most complex, difficult decisions which were on her neck, nobody listened to her.
Yeah. It's a horrible feeling because I mean, of course, especially if you've worked hard to master your art or your craft, or you've gotten to a senior level, there is a sort of expectation that your voice would be as heard as anybody else's, of course. I mean, that's just, and I think that there's a lot of people, and I have spoken about this, that you can be rejected in any role at any level in any organization. Like, just because I had reached this, senior level of operation, and I was the HR director, and I had quite a decent amount of influence, let's say, at the time, doesn't mean that you feel seen, heard, fulfilled. Like, all of the things that we talk about doing for our workforce, doing for the employees, you can end up feeling exactly the same as a leader.
Yeah.
It isn't any different. You're not impervious to it. You're not protected just because you're now at the top. So I can remember driving to this meeting thinking, I matter, I matter, I matter, I matter too. And I mean, I was saying that was not coming from a position of ego at this point now. I mean, my confidence was through the floor. I was really starting to question myself and think, can I even do my job? Like, what is this because I actually am ineffective? Am I ineffective? And am I not seeing things the way that everybody else sees them? And therefore, actually, am I just really crap at my job? I mean, so me driving along going, my voice matters too, I matter too, was really me sort of trying to build myself up to have this conversation. And I basically said to them, I can't do my job. You want me to be the HR director. You want me to create a good culture, I presume, so that we can sustain performance. Our strapline is creating the best place to work. I'm doing my bloody level best to make that happen. And I'm having conversations with fellow leaders saying, right, so we need to get better at doing better project briefs. And they're like, no, it's the capability of the engineers. Well, it's not the capability of the whole bloody workforce, is it? Like, I mean, that's not. And we actually employed some incredible people. I mean, that is one thing I could say about that organization at the time. We were one of the best. We were one of the best at what we did. So we attracted the best. They were amazing. And so I was like, no, I'm not going to stand for that. I'm not going to stand by this idea that it's our engineers, when I know that we just need to get beyond our own ego and we need to be better as leaders. And so what ended up happening is, rather than those two senior leaders going, yeah, no, I get it, I agree. And actually, so how are we going to make this happen? How are we going to make this work? In which case I would have stayed. What ended up happening is they did an investigation into whether my claims were substantiated. So if the hypothesis was we needed to get better at giving better briefs on projects, and the sponsors for the program that I was working with were not sort of complying, they did an investigation into whether my view was actually real or true. And so what ended up happening, and I'll never, ever forget that this is what happened, the most senior leader of the organization spent the next few months getting statements and doing sort of an investigation, basically, into whether what I was saying was true. I mean, it was horrific. And so then I stayed off work because there was no way I was going back into that environment. Basically, if I was saying I can't do my job, you're making it untenable, he was trying to prove that wasn't true. That was what was going on. And God, it was just horrendous. And I mean, I still had a good relationship with him. So he'd be phoning me saying, right, I've had these conversations with these people, and they've said that, yeah, what you're saying might be true a little bit, but actually, you're probably just making a big deal out of it. And I was like, what? Why does nobody get it? I mean, now, so by this point, I was broken. I was absolutely broken. And everybody stopped talking to me. So now by this point, I was questioning whether I was actually, questioning whether I'd taken the right approach. I was questioning my own intelligence. And now none of my friends, like my family, were talking to me. And I think they'd been told not to. Everybody had been told not to speak to me. So now, and even so, my best friend, who was my head of HR, we'd become really close. She wasn't talking to me either. So all my lifelines, all of my relationships, all of my friendships were basically cut away from me. And even my partner, who was one of the partners, who was one of the senior leaders, he was told that he wasn't allowed to like any of my posts on social media because it would be seen that he'd be supporting me.
Oh God, and this is somebody you're living with when you say,
yeah,
just so we understand.
Well, actually, that's not true. I wasn't living with him.
Well, I mean, as you know, like
soon after,
I guess just to the sake of
my partner, who I ended up marrying. So yes, my serious partner. And that was horrendous. He came home one day and said, they've told me that if if I continue to like your posts on social media, it will be seen as a black mark against me. I've got to stop. I was like, oh my God. So they cut off all of my lifelines. It almost destroyed me. It was the worst.
Well, I'm sure. I mean, I don't know, I mean, I do know because I understand it, how you feel, but for different reasons. But, how do you come back from that? It's when you're at rock bottom. And I think a lot of people, again, just to think about the listenership here, there will be so many people. And I know I've had many conversations where people tell me they felt like that. They felt very alone. They're in the middle of a grievance for something they don't even know they're in a grievance for. They don't understand it. They're being investigated. I've been that manager at some point, and I mean, we had a wonderful thing at the BBC where we would promote people just to get rid of them because it was safe going into a grievance with them in case you lost your job. Yeah.
Promote them knowing that they wouldn't do well at the job. So
I inherited somebody in my role who I was basically told just put up with it because we can't get rid of them. And then he nearly destroyed me too, by the way. And ended up,
oh no, but that's what happened.
right.
Sorry, it's what happens. Yeah.
And actually they ended up going back to the manager that ended up trying to get rid of them in the first place, who then ended up getting rid of them. But years, I mean, we're not talking 5 minutes. So I totally, that whole sense of, and I go back to that point that I said a few minutes ago, being a leader in an organization is and can be incredibly lonely,
Yeah.
caught, and it is about survival at times. And I think that that's something that, I've said this, anybody that knows me knows I say this a lot, right? Most people don't go into an organization to be a leader. They go into an organization because they want to do something that floats their boat, whether it's being an editor, a creative, an HR director, right? They don't really go in thinking, oh, I'm going to have 50 people report to me. That's going to be fun. And then suddenly, and I remember Tim Davies saying to me, Lou, can you just get everyone a GCSE in leadership? It would just be really great if we could have a
GCSE
in leadership.
Right.
And I sort of understand what he means.
Yeah.
Because, by the time people listen to this podcast, we'll be launching the World Class Change Leader. And that effectively is a GCSE in change leadership. And I'm sorry to promote myself on my own podcast, but it is that moment of saying, well, how do you make sure people have got those skills? But I'm sort of where we're going with this podcast. So tell me something. You're obviously in this lowest point. You're about to leave. Well, maybe you don't know you're about to leave, but let's move on to the point where you're now recognizing you have to leave, right?
Yeah.
It's not sustainable to stay, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Keep your relationship. I'm guessing as well at the time. You don't want that to change.
Yeah.
But where are you at this point? Because, there's some other things I'd love to get into with.
Yeah, well, so it was a really surreal situation because they still wanted me to come back.
Right.
I know that there's from an optics perspective, there's a potential lens here that you could see a hysterical woman, I know that, or unaware, unconscious woman or person who actually isn't doing a great job. And, I was just causing trouble for them and being disruptive. But
And they on a tribunal as well. I suppose that's at the back of their mind.
I definitely didn't. But actually, they'd offered me a promotion. I mean, so, and I had a really good relationship with the most senior leader.
Right.
And for years, he would talk about me being in a more elevated role, and he wanted me to be there for the long term. He would talk about me being one of his successors, if not his successor. So, I mean,
it really sounds a bit bonkers.
It was really, really difficult. I think it was really difficult. I think the reality is they wanted me to be there because they know I did a good job. They knew I did a good job. They just didn't want me to cause any trouble. So by this point, I'm now trouble, right? So actually, I left and I just went on this. I totally lost all sense of self and a massive identity crisis. I felt a massive sense of failure at that point because I was the person that looked after people. And actually, even back then, this is years ago before wellbeing was really on the map, I took wellbeing seriously. I was developing what was quite a pioneering wellbeing strategy at the time, which was about taking better care of the people in our organization, but in a much more pragmatic and practical way than just putting flexible benefits in. And I was trying to do it through development, actually. I was trying to pull together a development strategy that supported wellbeing. I mean, the irony that I've ended up doing conscious leadership development, which is basically bringing well-being and leadership development and performance together. And I felt like I was full of the crap, because I was like, how can I be the person that was talking about well-being and taking care of yourself and resilience and being at your best? And then I basically broke and crumbled. So I felt really like I'd let everybody down. And then I went on this journey of discovery, like an inward journey, where I was like, what the bloody hell happened there? I was always really resilient and robust. I've always been very strong.
But I think those situations do make you look inside and analyse, because I think anybody that's suffered a trauma, and there will be, again, I'm sure many listeners on this podcast, and I don't think any of us survived without a trauma during COVID. So we're in this strange world where, ABC News said to me, one thing you need to know about coming out of lockdown, Lou, is that nobody will come back the same as they left. And I think that is what probably the best piece of advice was ever given coming out of lockdown for the organisation.
Yeah.
And I think that we're more open to talking about it these days, and more open to therapy. There's a whole host of things. So so let's just move you on. You've left, you've done introversion. You've obviously thought, right, how do I turn this around for purpose? Because I'm guessing that's where we're going with this journey after a while. And how long was it before you felt that you could pick yourself up and do something again, do you think?
I mean, it was within months.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. I'd created the conscious leadership model within months of leaving, like maybe 4 months. I just decided that was not the fate that leaders should experience, and that leaders were actually just employees. I'd never felt so much like an employee as I did during that experience. And I just thought the work shouldn't break you. Your working environment shouldn't break you. At the very worst, it should feel like benign. And at best, it should really enable you. And I just thought, no, I'm not. This is not, it's not okay. It really did awaken the inner activist in me. And I just thought, we've got to do better. But I guess the paradox here was I had been pushing myself to the edge for the year running up to that. I'd been working, all hours to try and uphold this mission, this vision of creating the best place to work. I've been pushing my team really hard. I kept on saying to them, we need to do less better. But I never, ever helped us to figure out how to do that.
Right.
So my team were just, so overworked. Everybody was getting more stressed. They were starting to fall out with each other, which had never happened before. Bearing in mind, I'd been there for 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
My team and one other team in the organisation always had the best engagement survey results. Well, we were always like that. So my team was always a thriving team, but we were all falling apart at the seams. And then I realised that actually it was probably because I was falling apart at the seams that my team was falling apart at the seams.
If we follow our leaders, behaviour breeds behaviour, right? We've been taught that from day one.
Yeah. And of course, I mean, this all now leads to what happens. So the combination of leaders need to be able to tell the truth, even if we have to create a safe place for that to happen. They have to be able to get this stuff off of their chests. What I now know, now that I specialise in this, is that it is masking and not telling the truth and not being able to be authentic that actually is one of the biggest contributing factors to leadership burnout. And it's not a capability issue when a leader burns out, it's a capacity issue. It means they've been pushed too far for too long. And that can either be through just being overwhelmed and overworked, or it can be through something cutting across your value system for a really long time, and normally a combination of the two that leads to burnout.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my big realization, and the reason I created the conscious leadership model, was actually that if I had been more self-aware, if I'd understood myself better, if I was able to put better boundaries in place, and if I had realized the position or the place that I had given work and the people at work in my life, how important they were, but also who I am and what I stand for and what my values are and why all of this meant so much to me, if I'd understood all of that a bit better, I think I probably could have defended myself against what ended up happening. What actually should have happened is I should have just left earlier. I don't think I was going to be able to change the culture in the way that I needed to. Because by this, it's like going back to what you said earlier on about being in a relationship and breaking up in a relationship. Sometimes you just grow apart.
Yeah.
I was with them for a really long time and everything was fine for a really long time. I wasn't 10 years of, awful,
Sure.
feeling terrible. It was years and years of feeling great. And then, a couple of years of feeling pretty terrible. We grew apart. Like, my values became even stronger. I had much, much more purpose, a greater sense of purpose. I believed in things more than I ever did. And we sort of started to go like this, and I should have just left. So I learned so much about myself and about what would have enabled me. But the other thing was, I just thought, God, I was surrounded by leaders all the time who were struggling and suffering and not able to tell the truth and just living with the status quo, not really knowing how to lead their teams. And I just thought, right, I've got to make it easier for leaders to navigate all of this. And then conscious leadership was born.
But we'll get into just a bit around the framework before we come to the end of the podcast on that, because I think people will be very interested in that. But I think something that you said at the beginning, something I've experienced being in business for over 3 decades, is if you don't have people at the top that believe in it, it's really, really hard to try and be that person somewhere, wherever you fit, whether you're 2 ladders down, 4 ladders down, whatever it might be, right? And it takes, I think, real courage to be somebody that stands by your values and to know when to go. I mean, it's not the same thing at all. But I've actually just left my tennis club because I don't believe in the values of the tennis club, right? I love the girls. I love the girls. I'm devastated. We're all devastated. The WhatsApp group have blown up and they're all begging me not to go. It so happens more are going now, and probably even more will go by the end of the financial year for the club. Because what I chose to do, even though everyone was really shocked, was to stand up to my values, right? And they went from being a very inclusive, gorgeous club to a very uninclusive, elite, money making. And actually the conversation was, you don't spend enough, so therefore you won't be good enough, and therefore you can't play in some of the fun things, and that was really the conversation. So Tasha Shank, who's been on 3 of my podcasts, talks about how do you retain your dignity when it's being eroded. And I think what you're talking about in your story is that however everyone's smiling at you and telling you they love you and they still want you, it's a bit like the tennis club. We still want your money. We still want you. We still want you to contribute because actually we do like you. We don't dislike you. But actually, I ended up using Marsha's term, even in the tennis club. I am not going to let you erode my dignity. It's inclusive. You don't make people feel good. And therefore, I don't want to come to a club where you, because you're 70, you're not allowed to play tennis anymore.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm nearly 10 years away from being 70. So what does that mean to me? Right. So I think there is something about what you're saying. And I think what I feel in what you said is you may not have realized at the time, and this probably comes into your conscious leadership model, but you did have to retain your dignity and say, I am worthy. I am okay. I can be the person I want to be, just not here.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it.
Right.
Yeah.
And so let's get into, because I'm really conscious of time and I've got so many things I want to talk to you about, but you talk about, clearly what you've learnt and what's driven you as an entrepreneur. Conscious leadership, you've also mentioned why you think it's changed you. Tell us a bit about how, if I'm a leader listening to this podcast, how do I really take on conscious leadership? What does that look like? What does that feel like to me to take that on?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is, it's a bit like Alcoholics Anonymous. To start with, you have to say, like, I'm an alcoholic. You have to say, I am probably not aware enough of myself as a leader. Because we know, I mean, people think they're self-aware, but most of us aren't. I mean, there's research that shows that. There's research that shows that. So, most of us think we're self-aware. Only about 15% of people are self-aware. So I think the first thing is to recognize that you need to learn about yourself. So that's the starting point. You often hear leaders talking about the fact that they read prolifically. I mean, like famous leaders, people who are in the public eye, they're constantly reading and they're trying to understand more about themselves. And, you do need to understand yourself. Leadership is a very strange phenomenon in that we are expected to motivate and engage a group of people around us. And we've never been trained in psychology, human behavior, behavioral science, neuroscience, any.
No, not at all. And unless you're particularly interested in that now, thanks to podcasts or books. But I mean, I've worked with a wonderful gentleman I hope you meet one day called Winford Dorr. But I love what he talks about in terms of neurodiversity, neuroscience, and how we do things. And also Marsha, again, on the other podcast, she's very much an anthropologist and talks a lot around the neuroscience of leadership, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
So there are some podcasts where we've actually, if they want to go deep from what you're saying, we've got some. But so let me, just because I really want to get to the crux of what you do now. So a conscious leader, give me the steps. So I'm a leader. I need to be more self-aware. I need to be better about myself. Already 15% of us only 15% of us are actually truly self-aware of us.
Yeah.
Which is a very low number.
Yeah. So just the segue from understanding leadership, I guess, is most of the models to date, the big models that we've used in our organizations like transformational leadership and servant leadership is about others, generally is about understanding others, whereas conscious leadership is really fundamentally about understanding self. So there's 5 aspects to conscious leadership. The first one is purpose. So, what am I doing here? What's important to me? Why am I doing this? What are my values? What do I stand for? Because you can quite quickly, once you ask yourself those questions, see why you get frustrated in the way that you do, or whether, if you're really enjoying work, you can see why that is. If you're not really enjoying work, you can see why that is. But also it really influences how you lead. What is important to you as a leader influences how you show up every day and how you treat other people. So first of all, you've got to engage with that. Then you need to really have an honest conversation with yourself about the extent to which you're willing to grow, whether you're willing to change, whether your ego leads you, or whether you're trying to mask and put on an act all the time, or whether you can actually be your authentic self, because modifying your behavior constantly is really, really tiring.
Yeah.
So the magic really is, how can you get as close to who you really fundamentally are as a person, whilst also still being an inspirational and good leader? So that is about who am I? How am I growing? How am I developing? Do I have a growth mindset? Do I believe I can grow? It's amazing how many leaders suffer with imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
So they've capped themselves at a certain level and decided they can't go beyond where they are. But you have to remove that. You have to get beyond imposter syndrome as a leader. Well, you have to get beyond.
I mean, some of the stats I've seen, I know you've got your own, but some of the stats I've seen recently goes into the billions, if not trillions, of how many people are affected by imposter syndrome. It is absolutely huge, that most of us at some form in our life, regardless of what job we do, or even if it's not even about a job. Yeah, I mean, my daughter said to me the other day, I know it's slightly bizarre, I don't feel I'm worthy of driving this car, even though she saved up and bought it herself.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
I feel like I'm driving this car, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I said, but you bought it yourself. You went to work and you earned your money and you're paying it off and you bought it yourself. Yeah, I know, but should I really be driving a car like this? Because
yeah. Well, but that's what I mean about the inner work. And of course, if you don't really connect with imposter syndrome, so this feeling of being a fraud and, waiting to be found out, you might be able to connect with just self-doubt, like doubting your decisions and doubting whether you should be in the role that you're in, etc. If you're at the other end of the spectrum, where you have no self-doubt whatsoever and you never question yourself, you are now there's another problem to deal with. So you don't want to have absolutely no self-doubt, and you don't want to have all of the self-doubt.
you need a bit of a balance.
Yeah. So you really need to think about that. But you do need to be willing to flex and change and grow and be open-minded as a leader, both for yourself in terms of your own personal growth and your own mastery of leadership and life, but also for the sake of the people around you. Then the third aspect is about resilience. That's the mindset you show up with. So am I solution focused? Am I enabling other people? Am I showing up with a mindset that enables myself and the people around me every day? Do I get out of bed every day and say this is going to be a good day? Or do I get out of bed every day and go, this is going to be an awful day? Because that really will make a difference.
In COVID, I was on a call actually with Marsha. We were doing some work around deep communications, and I went into a breakout group with this really lovely woman. And she said, I never have a good experience when I go to the chemist. And I said, well, really, why is that? Or anywhere, she said, or anywhere. And I was thinking, well, okay. And I said, well, why? She said, because everyone I speak to is difficult. So I said, well, are they really difficult? Or do you think they're going to be difficult? She said, well, they are going to be difficult.
Oh, yeah.
So she's already having the fight. There's a wonderful joke, by the way, where somebody rehearses what it is they want to say to somebody, and they were all the way to their front door, and then when they open the front door, the person opens the front door, and then they punch them. Then they're the thing. But it's that moment of you've built up the inevitable, or what you believe is going to be the inevitable. So really that count what we mean about I'm making a bit of funny about it, but I'm trying to show that if you really manifest that something will be horrendous, then it will be horrendous.
Yeah, well, and my new book and my podcast is called Pieces of Choice. So, the juxtaposition is like you do actually have a choice. You can get up every morning and think everybody's an asshole, or you can get up every morning and think everybody's doing the best that they can. Let's try and make it a good day. You do have a choice.
Yeah.
So then there's another two aspects to conscious leadership. One is simply about being awake. So it's about, still trying to stay in the present moment, seeing things for what they are. Like conscious leaders have this amazing ability to see and hear the people around them. They can really connect with them and they make them feel seen and heard. And we talk about inclusion and we make it a bit sort of theoretical sometimes. At a very, very basic level, inclusion is just about seeing other people, just about seeing them, being like, oh, that's interesting, getting curious, being open-minded to a different perspective, seeing that they are different to you, seeing that they do things differently to you, and not being threatened by that, getting interested about it. And then the final part of conscious leadership is togetherness. Now, but you can only create a psychologically safe space. And bearing in mind, we know there's so much evidence now to show that sustained high performance stems from people working in a safe space, i.e. they feel psychologically safe, they feel like they can be themselves, they feel like they can speak up in a constructive way, But you can only create a psychologically safe environment as a leader if you operate from a position of safety, i.e. you have to try and it's low ego, high curiosity, open-mindedness, trust. You have to trust people. I often work with leaders. We do the psychometric that assesses consciousness against these 5 pillars, and their togetherness score is really low. And then you start talking to them, they're like, I trust nobody. I trust nobody. And you're like, okay, well, that's interesting. Being a leader, when you trust nobody, is really hard. You don't delegate, you don't give ownership. So all of these things you need to really understand about yourself in order to become more conscious. And that's an ongoing, there's no silver bullet to consciousness. It is, the first thing is about, I'm actually going to get a bit more conscious. The recognition that you can't master leadership. You can't be the best leader. You can't even be a good leader if you're not self-aware. It's your then you have a choice. You can go and sort of be a leader and make it up as you go along and hope for the best. Or you can say, no, I'm going to get better at this. I'm going to be the best that I can be. And so I'm going to learn a bit more about myself. And then you can journal, you can get a coach, you can get a therapist, you can speak to people, you can get feedback. Think of any way that you could learn more about yourself. Do a 360. Anyway, there's lots and lots of ways. And I would say do as many of them as you can. And then read books about self.
Yeah, I think that the 360 thing's really interesting. When I did the leadership development under Greg Dyke, we did with the leaders was to put them all through a 360. And I won't name names because there's some famous leaders there, but there was one particular individual who was completely broken by the feedback because they never saw themselves the way the rest of their team saw them. And was absolutely, literally gobsmacked and embarrassed that that's how they came across.
Yeah.
They did change and quite dramatically. But I think until you have that 360, I think the power of the and we gave it with psychologists, by the way. We didn't just,
Yeah.
because some of the feedback, as you can imagine. It's really quite tough.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the first time it'd ever been done.
Yeah.
But I think, yes, we can all have very high opinions of ourselves until somebody actually tells you the reality of, whether you're an empathetic leader, a non-empathetic leader, a tyrant, toxic leader like Nigel. You don't know. You don't always necessarily even know.
No, you don't. And none of us are perfect. We all have to do work on ourselves. I mean, actually, so I ended up working with University College London to get my conscious leadership model validated. And now we have all the evidence to show that when you are more conscious as a leader, you are likely to feel more engaged, more satisfied, more fulfilled, more well, less likely to burn out, and you're going to contribute more to your organization. So, we've proven that higher levels of awareness and connection to self gives you better life outcomes. So it's a win-win as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, well, this is a wonderful way to enter into the 2026 and beyond. And I think that in the world that we're in, a lot more people want to be more conscious generally, whether it's about the environment, whether it's about how we work with people, whether it's about our own values, whatever. I think we're becoming much more of a world that feels conscious. I think certainly what we've been seeing over the last few years. Just a bit of a plug for you, really, as we end the podcast, Natasha, because you've got you've got a new book coming out, Pieces of Choice, which I can't wait to see the first edition of. How do people find you? How do they find out how to get in touch with you? How do they get involved in a conscious leadership program? Spin it all here.
Yeah, okay. So my website is natashawallace.com. You can find me on LinkedIn under Natasha Wallace. My podcast, Pieces of Choice, is on all of the platforms, all of the podcast platforms. I've just developed a new program, actually, which is called the Perform Program. And it's actually to support managers and their people to have better quality conversations on a day-to-day basis, and it's all underpinned by conscious leadership. I've been trying to figure out how to scale conscious leadership, and it's one of the ways we're going to do it. So that's a new program which specifically supports performance management. But I've also got a talk called The Calm Leader, which is about how to stay emotionally regulated as a leader in a high pressure, demanding environment. And I've also got a program that sits with that talk as well. So if that resonates with anybody, then get in touch.
Absolutely. NatashaWallace.com. Natasha, we could have gone on and on, as I always could on all my podcasts, but I do try to have a couple of points if people don't feel they can't put the podcast to bed. But seriously, thank you. I know that you and I are plotting behind the scenes with what I'm doing and what you're doing, and seeing where we can perhaps come live to somebody somewhere soon. So that's this space we go into 2026. Natasha, it's been wonderful to get to know you over the last year or two. And I'm grateful for your honesty on this podcast. I'm always struck by how people come on with one idea and then having told the story on another. So maybe I give you that safe space.
Yeah, well, you do, absolutely. Yeah, I wouldn't have done it with anybody else, I don't think.
Wow. Thank you very much. If you want to find out, as Natasha said before, natashawallace.com, you can find out more about Natasha there, but I will put all the links to everything as this podcast goes live. So thank you. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for jumping on. Most people won't know, but you did jump on really early to do this with me this morning. So thank you very much, and see you soon.
See you soon. Thank you.
So I just wanted to offer some reflections at the end of the podcast with Natasha. First of all, I would really love to thank her for her openness and honesty. As you've heard, she shared a story with me that's not been told to anyone publicly. So I feel really flattered and humbled, actually, that she chose to share that here on this podcast. But I think what Natasha has shown us throughout this podcast is how we need to think about the importance of conscious leadership at work, how we reflect on not only conscious leadership itself, but how it can transform the workplace. But it also is about personal well-being. She really discussed her journey of self-awareness and how it has made her a much more authentic and effective leader. And now that's what she's offering to others at work. She talked quite a lot about the challenges that she had, particularly in navigating some of the change in leadership and in leadership roles that we have and the importance of resilience. And she certainly showed that to us in terms of her own story and what Natasha spoke about. But what she did show through her work through conscious leadership is highlighting how leaders can maintain their values and integrity in extremely difficult situations. So I think here for me, in terms of the reflections from Natasha, is really being clear about how you as leaders can create a very supportive work environment. And I really want to emphasize the significance on what we need to do today to create safe working environment and building trust as a leader that aligns us not just with our own, but our own personal values, but also the values of the organization. And I think that, I guess my challenge to you would be is for you to discuss perhaps as leaders now, how do you foster a culture that has trust, inclusion, and psychological safety? I think psychological safety is becoming one of the biggest conversations we're needing to create in the workplace. It's something that comes up all the time, particularly when we're talking about imposter syndrome, opportunities to invite diverse thinking, where we want to have inclusion completely at the table. If we don't create a psychological safe environment for where people can feel trusted and able to speak up, you therefore can't create an inclusive, safe environment. The other thing that I think Natasha brought out within the podcast for me was about really encouraging listening, something I talk about a lot in my work. Two of these is, if you can't see me, one mouth, but encouraging others to listen, encouraging yourself to listen as a leader. Reflections and personal growth are really, really important, and sharing understanding around one's values and what's important to your values and your purpose, and what do you need to make your leadership a more fulfilling experience. Those reflections work because, in my view, they resonate with emotional and psychological journeys of leadership. So I am really encouraging you as leaders or anyone listening to this podcast to really think about encouraging listeners to listen and to have people to connect with more, and therefore connect with people who have more of their own experiences and aspirations to share with you. I really hope that the reality of Natasha's story and the work that she's now doing out there in the workplace will give you the confidence to think more differently about conscious leadership. I'll leave all the links below if you want to reach out to Natasha. And I just want to thank Natasha again for her honesty and openness to share something that had never been shared publicly before. So just before I go, my usual message to you, which is please subscribe, please share, please send me a message, let me know what you loved about these podcasts, or even just share it to someone else on one of our platforms. Thank you so much. And I can't wait to bring you the next podcast. Until then, be safe, be well, and enjoy work.